The long-awaited epic series from Prime Video just debuted, and every week over the first season, we'll be talking to cast members, creators, and more about what went down and what it all means. Let us begin our journey before the Fellowship and before the forging of the great rings of power. I'm Dominic Patten.
And I'm Anthony D'Alessandro.
Welcome to Deadline's Inside the Ring, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power After Show. The first episode plunges us back into J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth and across vast lands and seas reveals the peaceful time of the Second Age.
Yet Galadriel, commander of the elves' northern armies, refuses to accept that the world has healed from the centuries of war with the evil Morgoth and the orcs. Mourning a deep loss, she knows that the forces of evil have not been vanquished and defies the direct order of the Elven High King Gil-galad to continue the fight.
From the regal elven city of Lindon, to the depths of the dwarf kingdom of Khazad-dûm, to the island nation of Númenor, the elf-ruled human stronghold of the Southlands, a shooting star across the world, and more. In episode 1, there's a lot of setup, which is obvious. You need to do it. Give us a sense of, for that first episode, what was essential for you guys to keep going and get in there?
In the beginning, really, it's about the relationships, because no one's going to go on an epic journey if they don't care about the people who were involved in it. And so we wanted to find relationships that were unique to Middle-earth, but that also, would be things people would be able to recognize and jump into. So it's a forbidden romance. It's Romeo and Juliet. It's an elf and a human in love and with cultures that don't get along. It's a female friendship of two girls doing stuff they're not supposed to, kind of behind their parents' back and getting into hijinksy trouble.
I was thinking Elrond and
Galadriel,
like the aunt and nephew,
yes,
who are like almost peers but not quite, and
who have like a deep respect for each other and a clearly long association, but there's also different agendas there. I think Galadriel, as the one who feels like she knows the thing that has to do, she's so righteous in knowing what needs to be done, but has lost some credibility, given how dogged she is in pursuing things. And I think all of us have felt that at times, like I know what has to happen, I know what's right, but getting the entire system around you to be able to work is challenging, and that's where she is. So trying to find these really relatable both situations that our characters in, and then also relationships to get all of our journeys going, so that when these big stakes, machinations and fate of Middle-earth stuff kicks in, you're really on board for the characters who are in those adventures.
My brother gave his life hunting the enemy. His task is now mine.
Your character is one of the few in Rings of Power that we know. It's an iconic character. What was that like for you to take on that role, and how did you make it your own?
Well, I think what's interesting about Galadriel is that we think we know her, but there's so much more to find out about her, and also Tolkien changed his mind about her a lot. So there's a fluidity to her character. And just also the elves that we kind of know from The Lord of the Rings, they're much more chilled than they were during kind of the First and Second Age. They were quite messy, often quite mean to each other. And so, it was really interesting to explore and to be able to know where she'd end up, and also knowing that my character doesn't know that, but I do.
Can you tell us, though, what drives her? Because she totally doesn't believe that there's peace.
What drives her, we spoke a lot about, is guilt. The elves are incredibly powerful, so when they do things, it has big effects. And mistakes have been made, and those mistakes have led to Galadriel losing her whole family. I also really was interested in the idea that, you can't escape your history, and you definitely can't when you were there for the entirety of the history of Middle-earth.
Yeah.
She's got a lot to unpack. But I think it was guilt, and it was a feeling like this can't be it, because I feel terrible.
I want to hear about you, your harrowing journey.
Why, Elrond? You really have become a politician.
One of the things about Elrond is he is a man of many faces. He presents himself to some people as something, some people as others, some as a friend, and also some as a politician simultaneously.
Well, it's the duality of him that I found so interesting. He's a half-elf, which is unique in this world. And so that interesting relationship me and JD and Patrick talk about all the time, that duality of being immortal but having sort of mortal roots inside of you, to have seen your brother grow old and die, as Elrond did, is a really unique experience for an immortal. I say this and I always think people must think I'm not being truthful, but I've always been so intrigued about Elrond. And so when I found out it was going to be that character, I honestly couldn't believe it.
What intrigued you about him?
Initially, from when I was younger, I always thought, why didn't he go? Why didn't he go with the Fellowship? He seems like a pretty good candidate to me. What is Rivendell and what does it mean and what was his past? So in terms of how it affects the choices, it's like, it's just an interesting thing to think about what he's presenting versus what he wants versus what he has to do, and that idea of duty and friendship and when he feels most committed to one or the other.
You know, we see that scene where he's literally mouthing the words of the king's speech,
Yeah.
which kind of reveals so much about who he is.
Yeah, definitely. He's very proud of his position. But he's ambitious. He wants to serve his kingdom and his king, and at the same time, his friend is here, who he loves. This legend is here with him, and so it's a really heightened moment, and he just wants to get it right.
You have fought long enough, Galadriel. Put up your sword.
Without it, what am I to be?
Elrond is so much younger than Galadriel, and is starting to come into his own as like a force to be reckoned with himself. So I think they're kind of at that period of like, she's like, who are you to me now? You seem to be...
You could say he's turning into a politician.
You could say that, yes. I really loved exploring that, and I was really lucky that I had actually worked with Rob previously, and it was just so fortuitous that kind of that relationship that had to be really close and familiar, we already kind of had an element of that.
We spoke a lot, me and Maeve, about when they first met, what her role in my upbringing was. I mean, obviously he's an orphan, you know. Clearly Gil-galad has had a huge influence on him, but we thought it was quite interesting to think about how he feels about what she's achieved. She is living history. It's a real admiration for her.
But isn't there also a sense of betrayal in terms of she wants to continue the fight, and he's like, nope, we've got a policy. I've helped craft it. This is where we're going.
Yes, although those aren't his words. He's been commanded to assist in this. I think he feels complicated about it. She's in the events of the First Age, doing things, creating history, and so to say that she's wrong is a really bold move.
Galadriel was so certain her search should continue.
We foresaw that if it had, she might have inadvertently kept alive the very evil she sought to defeat.
One of the elements of the king, of course, is he is just a handful of characters in Rings of Power who is connected to lore, who we know of. What does that place on your shoulders in terms of playing the role?
I like it, because I like that kind of actor research. I like doing it, and we're lucky that we have this level of literature to draw from. We know from the text that he is prescient in a way that no elf before him has been, that he is constantly aware of the continuous potential for the resurrection of evil, and he feels it before everybody else. He wears that, he carries that with him all the time. And that makes him interesting to me, and it makes him feel grounded in the legendarium. It's only good.
Our days of war are over.
When we see the king make the decision to end the days of war, obviously some feel that's the way to go, that the past is the past and there's a new day. Others feel he's being naive.
Well, it's definitely calculated in the sense that he's playing long chess. And as you know, ultimately, his plan does not come to fruition because he's not obeyed. So it's really hard to know if his plan would have worked. But he feels that some of his subjects are, in an attempt to extinguish the fire, fanning it and spreading it. And that proves to be true.
Was it wise to send Galadriel to Valinor?
Had she gone, we'll never know. I mean, I think so. I don't think he's naive.
Because at first, when you first meet him, especially when he's giving his glorious speech and you see Elrond mouthing the words, there's almost a little bit of like the puppet president. He's just wearing the outfit. He's not holding the scepter.
I definitely think the viewer, in the context of the world we live in now, comes with that. And I think that's very clever on the part of J.D. and Patrick. But heavy is the head that wears the crown, in that he knows this. And in the same way that a president has a speechwriter, because he's doing a billion other things during the day. There are a lot of other things on his mind other than the wording of his speech, which we quickly realize.
Are you acquainted with the work of Lord Celebrimbor?
Celebrimbor is a canon character. He is mentioned by Tolkien. It's a gift, I think, for an actor to have a character who has an arc, but with so much space to be filled in. All kinds of things go into the preparation. A lot of reading, obviously, to glean as much as you can from Tolkien, because that is always our watchword and has been and will continue to be. He gives you what he wants to give you, and then it's up to us to add a little more. And like he said, you know, in the Fellowship of the Ring, don't adventures ever end? And then someone says, I suppose not. Someone always has to carry on the story. Those who know him and the story know what's coming. For me as an actor, it's great to be aware of that, but yeah, ignore it, because he doesn't know that's going to happen to him. I think what's interesting is to signal him at a time where he's uncertain, because he is the Lord of Eregion. He's a big cheese, Celebrimbor, and he's an extremely talented jewelsmith, but that doesn't mean there are cracks in his armor.
We left Valinor and journeyed to a distant realm, one filled with untold perils, a place known as Middle-earth.
When you walked into the room to pitch this to Amazon, was this always about going toward the formation of the rings?
Yes. What we did every time we pitched it, because we had to pitch quite a few times to convince you know, this amazing, you know, new company in a way, to take a chance on us. And then we would say, you know, there's the Lord of the Rings, the 3 books that make this trilogy. There's the Hobbit. There's these, you know, incredible films that have been made, you know, epic films for those books, but they've only explored this much of this. And we want to go to all of it. And then we would go into, there's this incredible era, the untold story on the screen, the Second Age, which Tolkien never wrote in a novelistic form. He had it peppered throughout the books and laid out in a little more detail in the appendices. But it's throughout, you know, and we've done this sort of forensic dive into, you know, the poems and the songs, and Elrond tells this story here, and Gandalf tells that story there, to weave this backstory of the Lord of the Rings. And it was always about forging of the rings, the rise of Sauron, which, you know, at some point will become a major part of the show, the story of Numenor, Tolkien's Atlantis, and the Last Alliance and the battle with Sauron to save the world. You know, but that was always the plan. That was always the show that we felt as viewers and audience members we wanted to see. And our ambition for this was we wanted to do a huge mega epic, and that's what we said. We didn't want to do.
And we walked in, we said we want to do a 50-hour mega epic.
And an epic show, in the nature of it, has a lot of challenges, especially when you look at the legacy of the work here. What were some of the biggest challenges of making Rings of Power?
The challenge is Tolkien is so massive. It's not one world, it's a half dozen worlds just in the first season alone. And so it's all these different peoples and cultures and histories, and each of them have a distinct look, a distinct height. There are creatures and production design challenges and costume design challenges. It's the sheer volume and sheer size of the show.
I like to say it's all the things all the time. So to put a finer point on it, 25% of our characters are human. We had 22 series regulars in season 1, plus, you know, I think over 100 additional speaking roles, and there would be enough just to do the Numenor show or the Elf show or the Dwarf show, but these guys, I think rightly, felt it's not Middle-earth unless you have all of it. So the task was all of it all the time, plus locations that are, you know, I think so synonymous with this property to give you that epic feeling, and stunts and prosthetics and creatures and visual effects and special effects, and everything has to be handmade and finely crafted. There's no Middle-earth store where you go buy the beautiful dress that the queen wears. Everything has reference to other parts of the legendarium, and so it just goes on and on and on.
Every leaf, every prop.
Yeah.
You know, every cufflink is designed
Has
and
storytelling.
iterated, and you know, building that world from nothing.
One of the things when in roles like this, in genres like this, is people always talk about putting on the outfit or the costume gets you like 80% of the way there.
Sure.
Is that true for you?
In every aspect of this job in particular, the craftspeople, the army of craftspeople they've assembled really does elevate you. But it also demands a level of your own work and respect. Because it's a series and each episode is kind of its own film, you really get to luxuriate in the density of the detail. And in terms of my costume, there's one that I am particularly fond of. Kate Howley, our designer, she designed these beautiful, ornate rings that he wears. When his hand is open, they seem almost like one looks like it's what the Pope would wear. But with the duality of Gil-galad, if you see him make a fist, they interlock in these kind of intricate brass knuckles that they exist on both planes simultaneously.
How did it feel walking into Linden and down the path of heroes?
It was a really overwhelming moment, and the set that they created was absolutely breathtaking.
You know, so often when people watch things of this caliber, of this scale, there's a lot of like, oh, well, there's a lot of CGI here. But these sets are real. These sets are huge.
Yeah.
How does that change the way in which you work as an actor?
Well, immeasurably. Because you can touch the ground, you can pick stuff up, you know, it's all around you, it's alive. And so I was just so grateful that when you turn up on that first day that, here we are in a forest. You know, it just obviously affects everything around you, the environment, things that you can work with. It's amazing. They were that detailed that when you came to blocking scenes, we would go like, oh, that's really cool over there, and it would inspire choices. Because, you know, choices that we were making on the day that were related to just a creation of an incredible set. So I loved that interaction. I feel very grateful.
What was it like for you to walk on the Linden set for the scene featuring Celebrimbor, Eldron, Gil-galad, 3 iconic characters from lore? There's a sense of grandeur playing itself out here that is not CGI playing tricks with the eye.
No, absolutely right. And I felt that when I saw that scene. It's a very exciting moment for those. Well, it's an exciting moment anyway, because you're meeting a new character who's clearly going to be of some influence to Elrond. But also those who know Tolkien will find that, I would imagine, quite an exciting arrival, the 3 of them coming together. But you're quite right about the CGI. A lot of times I'm asked the question, how do you make sure that the, for want of a better word, human, because we're not talking human in terms of with regard to the elves, but these moments of connection, these personal moments, how do you make sure that they don't get swallowed in amongst all the grandeur going on around you? Well, the answer is you're with 2, for example, that scene, 2 great actors, and you just act your truth, you play your scene, and just keep it as intimate as you can, and the CGI will look after itself.
I felt really lucky with that. I very rarely had to suspend my disbelief. And one of the only kind of bits of CGI monsters that I worked with was the ice troll. But that was Andy holding this giant troll mask, screaming and being really scary. So that was still like, he stepped into that role very well and made me quite frightened. Yeah, it's a real gift to actually have everything in front of you.
So with Galadriel alone in that vast sea at the very end of episode 1, where will the Rings of Power take us next?
Join us for episode 2 of Deadlines Inside the Ring to find out.
Whoa! Oh my God! I see the
See you later.
We have to try everything. Right?
Hello.
Keeping this for later.
I don't care about the show. I just want a good blooper reel.
I want to learn science.
You guys are going to make me look like I'm in the show, right? You're going to put in the effects. Replace the green. I don't want to look like an asshole here.
Sorry.